Suarez continues to produce as one of the best pitchers in all of Major League Baseball and has been on an incredible stretch of late. But his performance yesterday ended a bit early after Rob Thomson elected to take the ball from Ranger after just 5 innings and 80 pitches despite just the 1 earned run allowed. This led to a couple concerns and eyebrow-raising quotes following the game from Rob Thomson and Ranger Suarez himself that I do want to sort through and break down who is telling the truth and should there be any reason to have some concern about Ranger Suarez moving forward. Now, to start off with here, he has been one of the most dominant pitchers, not just on this high-level Phillies staff, but in all of Major League Baseball of late. And to set the stage on exactly how good he has been, that since May 10th, Ranger Suarez has pitched 73.1 innings, 53 hits allowed, 10 earned runs, 17 walks, 67 strikeouts that he has raked up there. Only 6 home runs allowed. That comes out to a 1.23 ERA and a .95 whip there. And to kind of look at these lined up one after another, you can just see the stretch of consistent outings, going deep in games, limiting opponents to very few earned runs on a consistent basis, including scoreless on a regular basis there. It's been really encouraging to see from Ranger. And it does feel a bit like Groundhog's Day with this staff all over again, that we talk about all these new shiny toys in the pitching staff, whether it is Taijuan Walker or Jesus Luzardo, or you can go down the list from year by year, and then wherever we get about midseason, that Ranger Suarez is making a case for the best pitcher on the staff. Now, I understand that he is not Zack Wheeler, and Zack Wheeler certainly holds that category and, being the best guy, the clear ace of this overall pitching staff by a pretty significant margin there. But Ranger Suarez, maybe number 2 in that. But that leads us to yesterday where he was taken out after the 5th inning. And for myself, and I know a good portion of you guys watching at home, the question was immediately, why? What's going on there? This guy's dealing. This guy is the real deal. He has been pitching at an incredible level for such a consistent stretch. Why is he taken out of this game? Well, luckily, there was a bit of calming news after the game. As our very own Luke Arcani being in the press box, and he tweets out, Ranger Suarez is completely healthy. Rob Thomson said the plan today was 85 pitches for Ranger heading into the game. Suarez knew that and was completely on board. The Phillies are trying to avoid what happened last year. They don't want to burn Ranger out too early. And just as a reminder for what happened last year, that Ranger Suarez looked like one of the best pitchers in baseball for the entirety first half of the season, was a guy that was a legitimate all-star, was pitching at, again, being one of the best pitchers in baseball, and then it kind of hit a wall in the second half of the season. Truthfully, to me, it did look like he was pitching through kind of a dead arm for stretches in that second half, that he was on the injured list. He took some time away to ultimately recover, and I do want to give him credit that when it was crunch time there, when it was postseason time, Ranger Suarez still stepped in and did his job, that he was effective in the postseason for this Phillies team in the way that they needed him to be, but nonetheless still was not the dominant version of himself that we saw at the first half of the season. But where this gets a little bit interesting to me is I did not think that was the exact same message that was portrayed by Ranger Suarez. So as we go back to our guy Luke Arcani's article on Crossing Broad, which, by the way, my first article will be dropping on there either today or tomorrow, so stay tuned for that. But Luke writes, quote, and this coming from Rob Thomson, it was designed. So in June, he had 6 starts, 5 of them 7 innings, 1 of them 6 innings, all of them 94 pitches or more. We went in today just trying to pull back a bit, so he had an 85 pitch limit, Rob Thomson post-game. Suarez spoke to reporters following the game and said that he wasn't feeling 100% after his last start, specifically in his shoulder and back. So the Phillies had the 85 pitch limit. He said he felt great pregame today and completely healthy once he was on the mound. To continue with this, that from Anthony Sanfilippo here saying Ranger Suarez said that he wasn't feeling great after his last start in Atlanta with his shoulder and back, so the Phillies had him on an 85 pitch limit. Said he felt much better today. He'll have an extra day off before his next start. And then Luke writes up, the Phillies don't want 2024 to happen again. Ranger Suarez was a Cy Young candidate through the first 2 months of the season, and then the innings caught up to his back and arm. They'll monitor his innings specifically before the All-Star break. Thomson and Suarez both confirmed that he'll have an extra day of rest before his start next week. Ranger Suarez is now down to a 1.99 ERA on the season. He's looked truly remarkable on the mound in 2025, and the Phillies are smart to want to keep it that way. The Phillies strung together 5 runs on 5 hits, 3 of them being home runs from Kyle Schwarber, Edmundo Sosa, and Alec Boehm. The bullpen combined for 4 scoreless innings, pushing the Phillies to their 52nd win of the season. They'll go for the series win on Sunday afternoon with Zack Wheeler on the mound. So this still does sound mostly precautionary and not something that I think we should be in a state of panic about, but I do think it is noteworthy that Ranger Suarez is alluding to a bit of a back and shoulder issue. And if there is one complaint about Ranger Suarez, and I want it on record, I'm a Ranger Suarez guy. He's my favorite pitcher on this staff. He's a guy that I will ride or die guy with, it is sort of the lack of availability or injury concerns there. Now, I don't think it's something that is a huge outlier based on the current standards for Major League Baseball players and professional athletes, that the unfortunate reality is injuries have become a much more prevalent issue, that we see them pop up on a far more regular basis, and Ranger Suarez is unfortunately in line with that trend here. But that is one thing that I think is a bit of a fair criticism that you can throw his way. Now, with all that being said, I think Ranger Suarez has proven a lot this season, and this is an important season for Ranger for a lot of reasons. At the top of that list here is he is an impending free agent, and this brings a lot of questions for both Ranger and the Phillies in particular here. The Phillies have obviously gone quite a few directions in adding to their bullpen, or to their starting caliber arms here, and to highlight exactly what they're looking at, of course, Zack Wheeler, who's under contract for 2 more seasons, Jesus Luzardo, who was traded for in the offseason and has a year of arbitration eligibility there, Christopher Sanchez, a dude who they've already paid, and rightfully so, Ranger Suarez, who we've talked plenty about right here, Taijuan Walker, who's a guy who should not be a part of the equation whatsoever at this point. It would not shock me if when push comes to shove and when it is trade deadline time, if this ends up, they just have to eat the money and get him off this roster. If you can add enough bullpen arms where you're moving the roster parts around, there's no need for Taijuan to still be on this roster, even though I know he's being paid handsomely to do just that. Then there's Aaron Nola, which there is an interesting conversation to be had about, because if Aaron Nola can return to himself, and there still is not a clear timeline for when he will begin pitching. I know he's doing some legitimate throwing that our guy Luke once again has highlighted a ton of that being in the stadium, showing him in the outfield, taking warm-ups. So it does seem like he's getting closer, but we don't have a direct date, and it would not shock me if they wait until after the All-Star break, which, by the way, I think is looking important for a number of pitchers on this staff. Jesus Luzardo is certainly included in that mix as well, as it feels like he's hit a bit of a wall, and the innings might be catching up to him, as he's already thrown a lot more innings this year than was the case last year, with injuries being a key part of that. But to bring it back to Nola specifically here, that is a guy that, all things ideal here, he's your number 2 option on his pitching staff. We have not seen that yet this year, that when he was on the field in the early parts of the season, and to be fair to him, playing through a stress fracture in his rib and had an ankle injury that did pop up there, he was not the 100% version of Aaron Nola, but we have not seen it yet this year. In an ideal world, he can step right back into that role, be the innings eater and second best option on the staff in a way that plays in the postseason there. But what if that does not happen? That brings in a couple questions, and why I think that is complicated with Aaron Nola specifically is that is a guy who I don't think his stuff plays in the same way out of the bullpen. For a guy like Luzardo, or a guy like Ranger, or even Sanchez, I think you can throw in this conversation here, that if you need to shift things around and throw them in a bullpen role, that they can absolutely do that. I'm not sure if that is the case with Nola, but I also want to bring forward the conversation moving forward, that not just this year, but next season. When looking at this depth chart from the rotation once again, that you're already committed to Nola, you're already committed to Sanchez. Zack Wheeler, you got 2 more years with Christopher, Sanchez, and Luzardo is kind of the interesting one here. I get that this Mick Abel kind of out of the picture here at this point. We'll see where he's in the conversation, but Andrew Painter is sort of this lingering over factor here. I just think it would be wrong to abandon Ranger Suarez on a price-based decision here with blind trust in a guy who we've yet to see pitch at the major league level, or a guy showing some concerns in Jesus Luzardo. Now, there is a whole lot of baseball still left to be played this year, in which our opinions on this can change. That Luzardo, I've been impressed with overall, is still a guy that I want back on this Phillies team, and I'm viewing in highlight at this point, but not a guy that I think is the guarantee that Ranger Suarez sort of has become. That, say what you want about Ranger, he's basically been this year after year, and a guy that has turned himself into one of the better pitchers in baseball, way beyond what he gets the respect for. It's becoming clear to me that it probably should be a priority that you just keep Ranger Suarez on this Phillies roster and do whatever you have to do to make that happen. You pay him whatever needs to be paid. This is going to be his big payday, and I have no problem with it being in Philadelphia here. I think he's that important and that talented, and even as I do these mental gymnastics trying to figure out how to make it work, or what can this overall rotation look like here, it all feels like we're sacrificing the better pitcher to make room for question marks here. And to me, that just feels like bad baseball practice. So for Ranger Suarez specifically, I do hope that these injury issues are not anything that is popping up in the short term here, that this is truly precautionary, that there is not anything lingering in the back on his or Rob Thomson's mind moving forward. But I want him a key part of this Phillies franchise, not just this season, but moving forward. I think that has become very clear to me of late that this needs to be a priority for this Phillies team, even if the fit is not quite there. He is that good that you find a way to make it happen, and I do expect that Dave Dombrowski and John Middleton, Rob Thomson, they should be having those conversations right now to make sure that is the game plan. But let me know what you guys think about that with Ranger Suarez. How important is it for him to be back in those red pinstripes and continue to represent this Phillies franchise here? And what do you think an overall postseason rotation does look like at this point? I'm kind of all over the map in my head right now. My opinion has changed quite a bit already this season. Luzardo was a guy I once thought was a lock. Aaron Nola is sort of a wild card in this at this point. We know what we got in Sanchez, know what we got in Wheeler. It's a pretty fluid situation, so I'm not nailed down to anything just yet. But drop those thoughts below. Appreciate you guys for tuning in this video here. Make sure you're hitting that subscribe button if you have not already. Drop a like on this video. I'll be back talking to you next time right here on Phillies Digest. Peace.